Hi, Oral Com 2 students. Today we're here to talk about chapter 4. It's called Listening and Evaluating. Now, before the school was closed down due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we started this chapter, but we only got a little ways into it. So we're going to use this video to read the first part of the chapter again and review some of the concepts. Now, if you want to follow along with me, you can open up the PDF or just follow along on this video. The PDF is linked to the lesson plan, so you'll find it for Oral Com 2 either on your A day or your B day, and you'll also see a link to the PDF, which I'll refer to here and there. So I may have mentioned to you when I first introduced the chapter that it's one of my favorites from the book, and I have very specific reasons, and that is when I talk, sometimes I'm not really listening to the other person talking with me, or when I hear someone talking, am I really listening to what they say and absorbing it? So this chapter gets me thinking about that. Also, it gets me thinking about whether when I hear news, if the news is truthful, where did the news come from? Can I evaluate that based on my prior knowledge and my knowledge about how there are some sources that are not very trustworthy? So in a nutshell, that's what our chapter is about. We all know that these chapters start out with objectives, and we're going to look at the six objectives for this chapter. One, we're going to be able to name and analyze all of the factors that affect my ability to listen. Two, we'll identify some skills for critical but also active listening. That means really being engaged in your listening. Number three, list and explain 5 types of faulty reasoning. Number four, explain what's meant by propaganda. Now, everybody out there has probably heard of propaganda, probably seen different propaganda, but we'll look at some examples. Number five, we should be able to identify the most commonly used propaganda technique so we can be aware of it and know that someone's trying to fool us. And number six, we're going to evaluate a speech or learn how we evaluate it with a written and an oral critique. But the chapter starts out by asking us what really makes a good listener. And it asks us the question, how often has a friend or a relative or maybe a teacher or your mom and dad accused you of not listening? They're like, hey, are you listening to me? Obviously, you were within earshot, it says, and you heard what was said, but hearing and listening are two very different things. Hearing means you can detect sounds, but listening means that you are taking meaning from the sounds that you heard. And listening seems like it should be such an easy skill, right? Everybody should listen, but it's really one of the most difficult of all the communication skills to master. So for now, I'm going to pause and just have you think about this book has been teaching us how we communicate better, how we do it verbally, how we do it non-verbally, right? Mostly it's about us doing the communicating. It's not really about us listening. So we don't think about that being such an important factor. But what does being a good listener mean to you? I mean, if you try to pinpoint examples of good listening or of people that you admire as good listeners, then you begin to see that it's really a valuable skill. And those people that are good listeners, they are attentive. That means they're really focused in on you, but they're also receptive. That means they're open, right? And so they're absorbing the information they get. So they actively seek out information and evaluate what they hear, and then they respond to it. At the bottom of the page, it says effective listening requires concentration and effort. You can't just zone out, right? But there are many, many rewards. So let's take a look at our PowerPoint, and it reviews it really easily. What makes a good listener? We can see here the difference between hearing and listening. We admire those listeners that are attentive and receptive. But what are the benefits of being a good listener? Well, first, our interpersonal skills become so much better, right? We're able to communicate with people and people enjoy our company, right? We might discover something brand new if we're really listening. 3, we can increase our knowledge and our ability to evaluate. That means when I take in information, I can judge it based on what I already know. And then finally, if I am good at listening, I'm better at school and I'm better at work. So let's go back to our book. we can see there are many, many benefits to being a good listener, but there are some factors that affect our listening, and your ability to listen depends on a lot of factors. If you recognize those factors or even the conditions, that's your first step to becoming a better listener. Now, each factor is a potential obstacle to good listening. However, you can try to control each one and also how to have it work to your advantage. Let's look at the PowerPoint so we can kind of review these. We'll go down to the next slide. The first one is really one of the easiest for you to understand, for me to understand, that I can't listen if I'm tired, right? If I'm groggy, if I'm hungry. So what's my physical and mental state like? Am I really focused in on you, or is my mind on other things? Then the second factor is that the speaker himself or herself can actually affect your ability. Maybe they have certain traits or attitudes or even habits. And we all enjoy speakers that have this dynamic, energetic ability to really, be pumped up in front of the audience, almost like it's entertaining. But just because a person isn't like that, I mean, if you've got teachers that prefer to teach from their desk, or they're not really dramatic and dynamic in their voice, it doesn't mean that the message that they have isn't valuable. Okay. Then we could have certain prejudices in our own mind. These are biases or beliefs that we have formed, but they're not based on facts, and they might block real listening. A good example of that is politics. You might be left, you might be right, you may be somewhere in between, but many times we put up this mental barrier about people that are different from us. So let's be careful about that. Okay. Then this one is so easy for me to understand. I have changed my classroom. You guys have been in it. You know what it's like. I have neutral walls. I try not to have it be too distracting, but the environment itself changes your ability to listen. So if the temperature is too hot, you start to get groggy, right? If it's too cold, you're worried about being too chilly. If it's too bright, if it's too dark, if it's noisy outside, even the space, like how much space is between me and another person. Those good listeners, they block all that out. They are focused on whatever it is, whether it's the news or a speech that's being given, or of course, a teacher that's lecturing. Now, let's go ahead and go back to our book so we can kind of skim through, and I'll show you that we are moving through the PowerPoint. There's your prejudices, there's your environment, and now we're on page 84, and it's about listening critically. We all get the word critical, right? It means really important. But this one means more like being engaged and really a part of it. So critical listening means not just comprehending or understanding what's being said, but also taking those ideas and testing the strength of them. So critical listeners, people that are really engaged, they are active. They're not just passive. They don't just take it in and take whatever it is they hear for face value. So first, we've got to look at different things when it comes to hearing a speaker, or this could be a commercial on TV or a speech from a politician. What's the speaker's goal? So good listeners are going to listen carefully to whatever the speaker's goal is. Are they trying to influence you or persuade you? Are they trying to entertain you, right? So often when a speaker starts out their speech, they tell you what their goal is at the very beginning. Hi, today I'm going to talk to you about listening and evaluating, or whatever it is. So you've got to notice those times when the speaker cues you in and they build toward the goal, and they might even restate it at the conclusion, right? So also, there are some main ideas, and often these main ideas are your most important points. When speakers imply their main points or ideas or refer to them vaguely, you really have to analyze that information and identify what you believe the main ideas are. It's also key to note that speakers often state their main ideas clearly. They might have an introduction, or they'll have a little pause and they'll say, moving on, or something like that. You're going to use cue words. So listen for a couple of techniques. See the bottom of this page? It says, these are devices. Speakers use these to alert us, the listener, that these are the main ideas. They might use repetition, or they repeat certain words or phrases or sentences a few times, right? And signal words, saying things like above all or in conclusion. So we get where they are in the speech, and that helps us to identify their main ideas. And now let's move on to supporting details. It is crucial to understand that we've got to hear facts, examples, statistics, reasons, anecdotes in any speech. Otherwise, the speaker is just too weak. The main points have to be backed up, right? Just when you write a research paper, you're going to have a lot of facts and details to support that. So listen to what the speaker's telling you and then ask, are these facts accurate? Are they enough for me to believe that person? I'm a data person. I mean, not that I love numbers, but I really like to hear the facts. I like to hear the statistics. And then we've got to also consider what are called context clues, that when we use a technical term that is unfamiliar, we've got to really listen to that person that's speaking. And so we can get the information out of some context or the surrounding words or the ideas. So we're going to listen for those context clues. So let's get back over here to our PowerPoint and let's move on. So listening critically, just as a recap, it means not just understanding or comprehending, but also testing the strength. We are active and not passive. We identify the speaker's goal. We listen for the main ideas, and that is through repetition or other cue words or signal words. And then we're going to look for those supporting details like examples, facts, statistics, anecdotes, or expert testimony. That way we know that this person is on the up and up. And then there are context clues that we can hear if we don't understand a word that's unfamiliar with us. Okay, so those are the keys to listening critically. Moving on, though, it does mention here that other things we can listen for are comparing and contrasting and giving examples. And then finally, take advantage of what the speaker is doing with the nonverbal cues. Are they making good eye contact? Do they have a good posture? Are they using paralanguage? These are the sounds, words, or noises that are not necessarily the language itself, is paralanguage. What kinds of movements and gestures or facial expressions, or are they just silent altogether? Okay, so these are things that we can listen for. Then finally, we can listen for emphasis, and that is when a speaker emphasizes the meaning and you can hear the emphasis on certain words. So in your book, you can look at these examples that are over here. I guess we point the other direction, right? Other direction. I didn't see Greg and Xavier put anything on your desk. I didn't see Greg and Xavier put anything on your desk. Or I didn't see Greg and Xavier put anything on your desk. Depending on where your emphasis and your volume is, that's when the meaning will change, okay? Or you may hear a bit of contradiction. So let's read this over. By contradicting what a person says, nonverbal cues are like these warning flags. However, contradiction does not always mean this is a lie and look out. It might also indicate that the speaker is uncertain or unsure. You might hear them pause a little bit, right? And these are things that contradict. So we have to evaluate, can we trust that person? Well, that is where we're going to end. Our next section is going to be listening actively, but let's just recap using our PowerPoint. Again, listening critically, we look for nonverbal cues like the eye contact. Also, there are two basic effects of nonverbal cues. You could emphasize something or you can contradict. So we can emphasize our meaning or we can just contradict it all together. And that is where we will end for today, and we'll read the next part of chapter 4. Thanks for joining me.